listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. If you are ready to begin the process of resolving your infidelity situation in a way that's truly right for you, I can help you do it. If you want to work with me, the first step is to schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. You can also learn about the packages I currently offer new clients after that introductory session, as well as my current pricing through the services page of my website. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. I can't wait to meet you. Okay, this week's episode is a complement to last week's episode in which I talked about infidelity situations as life projects. I think it can be really important and really useful to think about infidelity situations as life projects or as pieces of business that have landed in our inbox that we can either attend to or not attend to. And looking at infidelity situations in these rather neutral, pragmatic terms can be so much more helpful than thinking about infidelity situations as uniquely challenging problems or problems that are impossible to solve or as big mysteries that are beyond the realm of our comprehension. But in addition to that way of looking at things, I also think it's useful to view our infidelity situations through the lens of our spiritual experience of life. Have you ever heard someone say that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience? I don't love that expression, frankly, but I do think it's worth considering that we're these little pieces of the cosmos, part of something so much vaster than we are, which we can only understand partially. And I don't think that viewing infidelity situations as life projects and as opportunities for spiritual development is at all contradictory. Now, I'll say more about what I mean by infidelity situations as opportunities for spiritual development as we go. But before I do, just let me make it clear right now that I'm going to say the word fuck a little more frequently than I usually do today. So if that's a word that you don't like to hear, you might just want to turn this one off right now before you have to hear it again. And I'm also going to continue talking about spiritual development and use words like soul and spirit and karma and destiny. These are not words and concepts that I usually use explicitly on this podcast, and there are a lot of reasons why I don't, but it's not because I don't think these are important concepts for helping us think about and contend with the human experience. I absolutely do think these are important concepts for helping us contend with the human experience. Moreover, I think it's really useful to think about yourself and your life from a cosmic perspective or a spiritual perspective, at least now and again. Some people do that every day, of course, but if you don't do it every now and again or ever, you might want to try thinking about your life from a spiritual perspective or a cosmic perspective. You might want to consider thinking about your soul or your spirit or both or something along those lines. Now, I know there are a lot of definitions of souls and spirits and karma and destiny out there, and I'm not going to operate from any firm or fixed definitions of those terms today. I will offer some working definitions as I go, but I also want you to feel free to think about your soul or your spirit and your karma and your destiny or your whatever in whatever ways that you find helpful and meaningful, right? And if you've never really thought in these terms, or if you're kind of put off by these terms, by this kind of language, that's totally fine with me. You can take these terms lightly or take them as words that point to aspects of the human experience that might be important to think about. To make use of what I'm going to talk about today, you don't have to get too worked up on whether you believe in souls or not, or how you distinguish between your soul and your spirit or your whatever and your whatever, right? We can take these kinds of concepts or ideas seriously or let them be useful to us without taking them too literally. The reason, or one of the reasons, why I'm going to use these kinds of terms today is because they can help us think about our answers to the question, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life, which is asked of us by the poet Mary Oliver. What is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? A lot of us never really encountered the idea that we might have a one wild and precious life, or that life could be particularly wild or precious. A lot of us have been living life with the understanding that we have to do the things other people say we have to do, or the things society expects of us, the things that we have to do in order to be successful, whatever that may mean. For a number of folks I work with, the idea that life could be anything other than moving from one socially sanctioned accomplishment or other thing to the next is rather foreign, or was totally foreign until their infidelity situation came about and kind of shook them out of their tree. And then they find themselves asking something to the effect of, hey, what am I going to do with this one wild and precious life of mine? Or, hey, wait a minute, maybe my life is pretty wild and precious. Or, hey, wait a minute, maybe there's so much more to being alive than I was previously aware of. And maybe this other stuff that I'm becoming aware of is really fucking important to me. And then, of course, some of us may have at times had deep awareness of the fact that our one life to live in this particular incarnation of ours is indeed a pretty wild and precious thing. But maybe we lost sight of that awareness as we got bogged down by the business of trying to get through our days and do all the things we're supposed to be doing. But then our infidelity situation came along or comes along and we're like, oh yeah, that's right. There is this part of me that is elemental and primal and wants to commune with the infinite. There is a part of me that wants joy and freedom and expansion. There is a part of me that knows that it's okay to want these things. What I want to suggest to you today is that even though getting the business of life taken care of is important, at least some of the business is some of the time, listening to the part of you that is elemental and wild and wants to commune with the infinite is pretty damn important too. And there may come a time in our lives when getting the business of life done, whatever that may look like for us, is damn near impossible if we don't let our souls speak to us. We can usually override whatever our spirit wants or whatever our soul is trying to tell us for a while, or at least to a certain extent, but not indefinitely. There may come a point at which we are more or less forced to listen to our spirit wants. And that may mean, in practical terms, allowing ourselves to acknowledge that we are in the midst of a life project, i.e., our infidelity situation, that we might never have anticipated or planned for ourselves. That may mean allowing ourselves to courageously and comprehensively examine our infidelity situations and be radically honest with ourselves about what we want, instead of trying to shove the whole damn thing under the rug. It may mean allowing ourselves to contend with our infidelity situations as life projects that may seem very messy or very potentially threatening to the status quo, instead of trying to avoid them or trying to not take these situations on as life projects. According to Joseph Campbell, Friedrich Nietzsche got to a point in his life where he had an idea called the love of your fate. The idea is that whatever your fate is, whatever the hell happens, you say to yourself, this is what I need. It may look like a wreck, but you can go at it as though it were an opportunity or a challenge. I want to suggest that you may want to consider that this is true or useful, or something like this is true of your infidelity situation. I think it can be really useful to consider that there may be times in life when our soul or our spirit or whatever needs particular challenges in order to become more of what it truly is, or for you to become more of who you truly are. And so, in a sense, your infidelity situation is a life project in very pragmatic terms, but it's also a life project on a whole nother level. It's a project of your spiritual evolution. It's a project of dealing with your own karma and taking responsibility for your destiny. Before I go any further, let me offer a few ways of thinking about what the soul or the spirit means, right? This is probably something I could have done at the start of the episode, but here we are. You could think of your soul or your spirit as the most authentic part of you, or the truest part of you, the most elemental part of you, the part or parts of you that want to commune with the infinite, the part or parts of you that trust that you being the fullest expression of who you are is not only safe, but is in the service of the greater good or the cosmic good. The part or parts of you that know that living up to societal expectations isn't necessarily the most important thing you can do with your existence. The part of you that is open to all of life's possibilities, right? There are other ways that you could think about the soul or the spirit too, of course, but those are a few of my suggestions. Now, as our good friend Carl Jung pointed out, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Quite often, we don't want to listen to the truest part of ourselves or parts of ourselves. We don't want to listen to the part of ourselves that trusts that it's okay to be the fullest expression of who we are. Because we think that the better thing to do is stick with the program and just do the things we're supposed to do. Get married and stay married. Have the kids. Make sure they go to the best schools. Get the fancy degree. Get the job. Make the money. Buy the bigger and better house. Live a life that other people think is perfect. And so on. Now, just to be clear, sometimes we do these kinds of things that I just mentioned because our soul wants to do these things, or the truest part of ourselves wants to do these things. For some people, getting married and having kids and driving the kids to soccer practice and getting the job and getting the promotion is an expression of who they know themselves to be in their truest form, right? I'm not trying to suggest that there are certain things that by definition a soul can want and certain things that by definition a soul couldn't possibly want, right? People might say that your soul by definition doesn't want a Lamborghini. Well, I don't know about that. Other people might try to make that argument, but I'm not going to. That's not necessarily my position. However, a lot of us get into doing the kinds of things I've been mentioning, or keep doing the kinds of things that I've mentioned, not because our soul wants them, but for other reasons, like because we think we have to, or because we think we should, or because we think we don't really have a choice, or because we think doing things differently would be too hard or too scary, or because we think other people will shun us if we do the weird things that our soul wants. And so we do things that we don't really want to be doing, and then we find ourselves slightly too extremely miserable, and we wonder why. Well, here's why. Your soul does not give a fuck about convenience. Your soul does not care how much money you have in your bank account, or how much debt you have, or how big your house is, or what kind of car you drive, or whether or not you own 0 cars or 10 cars, right? Your soul might care about the joy it gets from driving a car or a particular car, but that's a little different. Your soul does not give a fuck about what other people think of you or expect of you. Your soul does not care how prestigious your job is. Your soul does not care how fancy your job title is. Your soul knows that the point of being alive is not to be perfect, whatever the hell that might mean. Your soul knows that pain and challenges, even in their most extreme forms, aren't problems per se. Your soul knows that those parts of the human experience don't need to be feared. Your soul or your spirit is not afraid to experiment. I'm just using both of those words now for the sake of mixing things up, right? I'm using them kind of synonymously. Your soul or your spirit knows that the road less traveled is not a dangerous place. Your spirit knows that living a life that's truly right for you is a make it up as you go along endeavor, and that it can't really be any other way. Your soul knows that conventional definitions of good and bad and right and wrong aren't necessarily the point. Your spirit knows that it's possible for you to do well by others or do what you consider to be the quote unquote right thing for others without getting fixated on what is commonly considered right or wrong. Your soul knows that uncertainty is not a problem. Your spirit trusts that uncertainty is the birthplace of creation. Your soul knows a whole lot more than that and doesn't give a fuck about other things beyond the ones that I've mentioned here. But this is a good start of a list. So I want you to consider that your infidelity situation is your soul yelling at you or your spirit yelling at you and saying, hey, we need to make some adjustments around here. We have some priorities and deeper desires that are not being fulfilled, and that actually kind of matters. So if you're in the midst of an infidelity situation, I encourage you to try something out. See if you can step away from the specific details of your situation for a moment and try asking yourself these questions. What does your soul want in your life right now? What does your spirit want these days? I encourage you to think broadly as you answer those questions. You can think about what your soul wants specifically in relation to your infidelity situation or some aspect of it, as long as you don't get too bogged down in the damn details right now. But you don't have to think exclusively about your infidelity situation. I think there is great value in regularly asking ourselves to consider broadly what our spirits want without placing any constraints on how we answer. Part of the reason why I think it's important to ask ourselves these kinds of questions regularly is because it can be hard to answer these kinds of questions. Many of us have invested a tremendous amount of time and energy figuring out how to unhear the desires of our souls or our spirits, so that we may more successfully live up to societal expectations or other people's expectations or avoid discomfort, right? But even if it's hard to answer these kinds of questions, what does your soul want? What does your spirit want? Not only can you still give it a try, but that might be the best reason to try. And again, if you don't like the language of souls and spirits, that's totally fine by me. Here's something that you can try asking yourself instead. What does the you that trusts that living up to societal expectations isn't the most important thing you can do with your life want to do at this stage of your human experience? That sentence was kind of a mouthful, but I'm not even going to try to rephrase that. Instead, I'll tell you this. Martha Beck, who is a big famous life coach who I have formally learned from as a paying student of her life coach training program and informally learned from through reading some of her books, talks about the difference between the social self and the authentic self. I don't use that distinction very often myself because I take issue with it in a few ways, but never mind that right now. Right now, the point is that if you don't want to think about having a soul or a spirit, you can try using Martha's distinction between the social self and the authentic self. And you can ask yourself, what the authentic self in you wants right now. Or you can ask yourself what the part of you that doesn't care about societal expectations wants right now. Now, some of you may have gotten to this point and said to yourself, okay, fine, I'm with you. And I think I know exactly what my soul wants or what my authentic self wants. But if I act on that, life as I know it is going to fall apart. And that's going to be crazy. So what do I do about that? Well, I want you to consider that your one wild and precious life does not have to be free from all challenges. In fact, it might be that the challenges are a particularly rich part of your one wild and precious life. Sometimes we need to make our way through certain challenges in order to become the person we most need or want to become. What if we could consider our gnarliest challenges or our most seemingly difficult life projects as perfectly designed life lessons that have landed in our lap as opportunities to grow and evolve in exactly the ways we need to at any given moment in time? That's an optional way of thinking, of course. You can decide if you find this kind of perspective helpful or not. And all of this, everything I've been talking about so far, points to the greater question of what it means to be alive and what the point of being alive is for humans collectively and for each of us as individuals. And of course, there are many answers to those kinds of questions out there circulating in the cultural fog. And I don't care to prescribe any answers to you or for you, but I do recommend that you ask yourself these questions. Paul Beatty, in his novel, The Sellout, which is a mind-blowingly good book, by the way, has a character who sometimes says this to other characters in the novel. You've got to ask yourself two questions. Who am I? And how may I become myself? These kinds of questions can serve as a useful backdrop for considering your questions about what you want to do about your infidelity situation. If we decide that the point or one of the points of our existence is to continuously be faithful to who we are becoming, we may decide that we really want to figure out how to do the so-called hard things in life in the service of honoring what our soul wants or becoming who we know ourselves to be. We may decide that we're willing to take on some rather gnarly challenges because we'd rather be the person who takes them on than the person who tries to avoid them. So for instance, if we know that we want to experience all of the opportunities in life that are available to us outside of the container of our marriage, our karmic work, our life project, may be to bring our marriage to as loving of a conclusion as possible. And learning how to do this and then actually doing this may be a bit of a life project, but we can take it on as a doable life project. And we can choose to believe that in taking on this project, difficult though we may find it, we are becoming more of the person we need or want to become. Here's another example. If right now the main karmic task in front of us is learning how to enjoy sexuality and intimacy and connection in a way that we consider enjoyable, but also ethical and respectful of others, we might decide that we don't want to go to the strip club and get a lap dance every day at lunchtime if we're in a monogamous relationship and our partner thinks that this behavior counts as cheating. We might decide that we want to stop sexting with people we meet on dating apps if we're in a relationship that's supposed to be monogamous and our partner considers this cheating. We might decide that we want to stop going home with people we meet at bars and then calling our significant other to say we're staying at a friend's house because we're too drunk to drive. We might decide that we want to learn how to manage our enjoyment of sexuality and eroticism and connection and that kind of excitement and keep it within the bounds of our committed relationship. Not because it's fundamentally better to do that, but because we really want to rein that aspect of our lives in a little bit for our own sake, and because we genuinely don't want to be doing things without our partner's knowledge that we know they wouldn't like. That doesn't mean we're necessarily excited about giving up our lunchtime lap dances, but we may also know in our bones that it's worth it to take on the project of channeling our energies in a different way than we've been doing. That project might strike us as annoying or challenging, because why shouldn't we be able to have our cake and eat it too, after all? But it still might be a project that we truly want to take on. However, on the other side of the coin of this example, we might decide that at this point in our lives, what we most need to do for the sake of our spirit is to let ourselves have the freedom to do whatever the hell we want sexually. But if we want to do that as honestly and ethically as possible, that might mean that we decide to break up with our primary partner so that we can get ourselves a lap dance whenever we feel like it, right? Getting clear on what your soul wants is one thing. Rearranging your life so that you can have what you want or more of what you want is another thing. Both pieces of the puzzle can be projects in their own right. Both pieces of the puzzle can be hard, quote unquote, to deal with. And what if that's okay? What if it is in solving life's most demanding challenges that we become ourselves or more of ourselves or the fullest expression of ourselves? To paraphrase Eleanor Roosevelt, every time we do something that we think we cannot do, we gain strength, courage, and confidence. And we learn in no uncertain terms that we can do things that seem or seemed impossible and live through the fear we may feel in approaching these tasks. And then we realize that we can do the next things that life presents us with as life projects too. And when we do this, when we learn these things, when we see this happening in our lives, we gain the freedom to live as who we really are. And that's not a small thing. Now, some people love to tell me that if we all prioritize living as who we truly are, society would fall apart instantly. And some people don't say that quite so dramatically, but some people really do. And the underlying concern is that if we aren't all doing things for other people as individuals and in the collective sense, the social fabric will disintegrate. And to that I say, who says that living as you truly are means you won't do things for other people? I would argue that when we claim the freedom to live as we truly are, we're able to do a lot more for other people by many different measures. Ever heard the expression, people are assholes because they suffer? You may have heard it right here on this podcast before. I think that's true. And I think the converse of that is also true. People who have figured out how to relieve themselves of unnecessary suffering can be pretty wonderful to be around and are much better able to not be assholes to other people, so to speak. If you reflect on your own life, you may find that this is true in your own experiences. I know for sure that I am a lot better able to be wonderful to be around, or at least not be totally unpleasant to be around, when I'm not suffering excessively. I know that when I allow myself to listen to my spirit, I suffer a lot less than when I try to ignore it because I think what it's telling me sounds inconvenient. And I know that this allowing versus ignoring definitely has an impact on how I engage with others and how available I am to contribute to the good beyond my own immediate needs or wants, right? So many of us are so worried about being selfish, whatever that may mean, but I think we may need to worry about not being selfish enough. And I'm running the risk of going off on a major tangent here. So let me just briefly sum up my point by saying that the consequences of not allowing yourself to be who you truly are and live in accordance with your deepest desires may be way worse for those around you than you think the consequences of listening to your soul would be. Crazy, right? Now, another thing that people love to tell me that I think is very relevant to mention here is all of the reasons why they probably would have been pretty content in their lives if only their infidelity situation had never happened. Sometimes people even tell me things like, If I could only go back to before the affair started, I would. Or, if only I could never have started doing the things I'm doing outside of my committed relationship, I never would have started doing them. People, why on earth would you spend your precious time and energy thinking this way? Unless you have a time travel machine, which I'm pretty sure you don't, you cannot go back in time and change things. You cannot go back to the way things were. You cannot undo what's currently happening. And what if that isn't even a problem? To echo what I've said already, what if your infidelity situation has presented itself to you as a gift from your soul or as a kick in the ass from your spirit? What if your infidelity situation is offering you the opportunity to get real with yourself and offering you the opportunity to get really clear on what you want to do with your one wild and precious life? And if that is what's happening, or if that is a way that you want to choose to think about your infidelity situation, isn't that a project worth taking on? Obviously, my answer to that question is yes, of course it is. But as usual, I will tell you that I think it's perfectly legitimate for your answer to that question to be no. In other words, I think it's legitimate for you to say, I don't want to think about what I want to do with my one wild and precious life. I don't want to think about my life as wild and precious. I want to prioritize convenience and comfort and doing what I think I'm supposed to do. That is legitimate. If you don't want to think about what your soul wants, if you don't want to think about what the truest part of you wants, that is okay with me. But as usual, my recommendation is that you make these choices as consciously as you possibly can. All right, everyone, that is it for today. If you would like my help considering what you want to do with your one wild and precious life, and my help dealing with your infidelity situation in a way that allows you to live as the truest, fullest version of yourself, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I can't wait to meet you. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.